Hey guys, welcome back to another video where we are going to look at AgilePoint NX connector for Google Sheets. Google Sheets is a spreadsheet program included as part of web-based Google Docs editor suite offered by Google. With this new feature, you can create a nice looking web front end to your spreadsheets with rules, external lookups, validations, calculations, charts, etc. And no matter where you are in the world, the web apps connect your spreadsheets so that people can work as a team in real time. Let's look at this connector in action. So I'm in my demo environment right now, but before we start working with the Google Sheets app itself, we need to create an access token. The access token can be created at a global level in Manage Center and can be shared across applications, or we can create it at an app level and restrict the scope to that app itself. In my case, I'm going to create it at a global level, so I'm going to go to Manage Center, App Builder, Global Access Token, click Add Token, search for Google, click on Google Workspace. Now give this token a name, so I'm going to call it demo. Now next it is asking me to provide a client ID and client secret ID, and it is also providing me a redirect URI. So in order to get the client ID and client secret, I'm going to navigate to the Google Developer Console over here. So you can go to console.cloud.google.com, and before we do anything, we have to create a project. So I'm going to go ahead and say create a new project. Let's call it demo project. It auto generates a project ID. In case you want to go ahead and change the project ID, you can do that. I'm going to just leave it as default and click create. Now once the project has been created, click select project. You can always select the project from the drop down over here as well by clicking on the corresponding row. Now once the project has been selected, go to API and services. Click on auth consent screen. So the first step we are going to do is, after creating the project, we are going to set up our auth consent screen. We are going to say user type is external. Give this app a name. So I'm going to just call it demo. A support email address. I'm going to just use the primary email address of my Google account right now. You can give it an app logo, a home page, protect it with your authorized domains. I'm going to just leave it as default. There are a lot of these security settings which you can do, or you can even personalize the home page as well. I'm going to just leave it as default. For the developer contact information, I'm going to give my email address. Next, it is asking me what kind of scopes I should ask user to provide while generating the access token. Now, in my case, I don't need any specific scopes. I'm going to just deal with Google Drive and Google Sheets. But in case you're using this token for other purposes, you can give some of these scopes as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say save and continue. Now it is asking me to provide a test user. So while the app is in testing phase, which users can access this particular app? So I'm going to give my account, save and continue, and it shows me a summary of what has been done. Now next we are going to go to library and enable a couple of libraries. So I'm going to first search for Drive. I'm going to click on Google Drive API and enable it. Now once that is done, click on Browser Back button, the back button on the Google Drive page, and then search for Sheets. We are going to enable Google Sheet API as well. Now once that is done, we are going to finally go to Credential and say Create Credential of type auth client ID. Application type would be set to Web Application. And it is asking me to provide an authorized redirect URI. So I'm going to go back to Manage Center, copy the redirect URI from there, click Add URI, paste it, and click Create. So it provides me a client ID and client secret. I'm going to copy those, and paste it in my Manage Center screen. Now, once this is done, we are going to click on OAuth 2 Access Tokens button over here. It's going to ask me to log into my account. It says this app is a developer's app. I have not published it yet, so it's showing me a warning. So I'm going to go ahead and say continue, and it is showing me the consent screen over here. I'm going to say yes, I trust this app. So click continue, and it gave me the OAuth access token. Now, from a security perspective, I can say that auto recycle this access token every 15 minutes or 30 minutes or every 60 minutes. I'm going to set it to 15 minutes, for example, over here, and click done. Now, once we have created the access token, next we are going to look at the scenario itself, which we are going to use today. So I'm going to go to my Google Sheets over here. You'll see there is a sample sheet kept over here called sample data. And it has a few set of rows for a student database kind of a thing. So it has student name, gender, class level, home state, major, and extracurricular activities. So we are going to work off this sheet. I'm going to switch to App Builder. I've created a sample process so that I can walk you through all the configurations of these activities. Before we do that, we are going to look at the activity group itself. So there's a new activity group called Google Sheets available, under which there are 12 new process activities available. We are going to see the configuration of each one of them over here in the sample process. So in the sample process, I have a form which I'm going to fill out and submit. It will first create a new spreadsheet over here. I'm going to look at the configuration of this one. So I connect to Google Sheet token, which I created. Choose a folder path in my Google Drive. So I'm going to say that create it on the root folder. I can always provide a folder ID or a URL over here as well, instead of selecting a hard-coded path. A spreadsheet title, the name of the spreadsheet which has to be created. And once the spreadsheet has been created, Google returns me back a spreadsheet ID, which I'm going to store it in a variable. It also returns back a URL, which I could store over here in another variable as well. But I'm going to store the ID itself. Next, I'm going to add a new sheet inside that spreadsheet. So I again ask on that form, I ask for the name of the sheet. And all I'm doing over here is connect to Google Sheets, provide the name of the spreadsheet under which this sheet has to be added. Remember, we saved this in a variable in the previous step, so I provided that as a variable. Title of the new sheet, number of rows, and number of columns which have to be created in the sheet. Now, these are optional parameters. You can leave them blank as well. And once the sheet has been created, I will get back the sheet ID, which I'm going to store it in one of the variables. Similarly, I'm going to perform a copy sheet operation. So my original sample data which was there, I'm going to copy one of the sheets from that sheet into this new sheet. So it first asks me for the source sheet configuration. So I'm again connecting to Google Sheets. My template sheet is called sample data. I'm going to select that one. And then I tell that which sheet needs to be copied over. It is sample data tab. That's the name of the sheet which needs to be copied over. When I click next, I have to configure the target configuration. I provide the spreadsheet ID or URL. Remember, in first step, I captured the spreadsheet ID, so I'm going to use that. This is the spreadsheet ID of my new sheet. And once the sheet has been created, it gives me back an ID, which I'm going to store in one of my local variables. So those were the sheet related operations. Now next we are going to look at some of the row related operations. So I have a form where I'm going to get some data which can be inserted. So I'm going to enter a couple of rows over here in the form, which will be inserted in my sample data sheet. So in this case, I'm working with the sample data sheet itself. So I selected that one. It could have been a variable or the new sheet. So I could have given the spreadsheet ID or URL. And it provides me two options. I can work on the sheets, or I can, Google supports concept of name range. You can create those within your Google Sheet. So I could have worked on that as well. In my case, I'm going to work on my spreadsheet itself. I specify the name of the spreadsheet in which these new rows should be inserted. value format. It could be raw values or math cell format. And then I also specify that the first row in that sheet is the header row. This helps me with the schema mapper. If this checkbox is checked, it shows me the name of the columns from first sheet over here, else it would have shown me column A, column B, column C. So I see the data over here, I can map it. So on the left hand side, what you see is AgilePoint process and form schema. On the right hand side, what you see is a spreadsheet schema. Next, we are going to update some of the cell data. So I get some input from users. It could update multiple a range of cell data. So I'm going to go and put update cell data activity over here. Connect to Google, select the sheet or provide its ID or URL, select the sheet name, provide a range. It could be in the format which is mentioned over here. So you can provide a range of columns which should be updated, value format, whether the first row is a header row or not, and then you just specify the mapping like which we did in the add row activity. Then next we are going to read rows out of the spreadsheet and show it on one of the forms. Connecting to Google Workspace, select the sheet or specify the spreadsheet ID or URL. Select sheet or name range. I'm going to select sheet in my case. Which sheet within that spreadsheet should be read? So I'm going to say sample data tab. How many rows, maximum number of rows to be read? It's configurable over here. And again, whether the first row is a header row or not. Based on that, I can provide the mapping. Now in this case, since it is a response, on the left hand side, what you see is the spreadsheet format, and on the right hand side what you see is my process and form schema, and I've done a mapping over here to a repeating subform. So I'll next show the results on a form, and then finally we will start inserting a row. Now previous one was adding a row, which was adding new rows at the end of the spreadsheet. In this case, I'm inserting a row in middle somewhere of middle of the spreadsheet. So once I get the user inputs, connect to Google Workspace, select the spreadsheet or provide an ID or URL, specify the tab name, and then you can either append at the end or you can say insert at a particular index, and you have to specify the start row number and end row number over here, and it would insert the rows between these two blank rows between these two numbers. Next, we are going to perform some column related operations similar to add or insert rows. You can insert new columns in a spreadsheet. So again, you can get those as an input in one of the forms, and you do the same thing. Connect to Google, select the sheet or provide an ID or URL, specify the tab name, whether you are appending it at the end or inserting it at a particular index. If you say insert add, then you have to specify the column letter between which the new column should be inserted. If I said append, I have to just tell the number of columns to append. Okay. Now we are going to start doing some cleanup. So I'm going to delete or clear some of the cell data. So I can specify a range, and based on that range, I can just clear the data in those cells. Next, I'm going to start deleting the columns. I'm going to delete the columns which I added. So I connect to Google, select my spreadsheet, or I can specify ID or URL, select the sheet name or ID, and then the start column letter and end column letter which needs to be deleted. Then next, I'm going to delete rows, the newly added rows, and again I specify the start row number and end row number which need to be deleted. And finally, I'm going to delete the sheet itself. I'm going to connect to spreadsheet and specify the sheet which needs to be deleted from within that particular spreadsheet. Now, I've already published this process out. I'm going to go to Work Center and start running my demo. I'm going to give it a name, so I'm going to call it AgilePoint Demo. Click Submit. So it kicked off a process instance. I'm going to go to the task list and bring up the process viewer. Now I could have worked off the task list, but I'm going to work off the process viewer so that you guys can follow along. So you can see the form got submitted and a new spreadsheet has been created in my Google Cloud over here. So I'm going to go back and you can see there is a new spreadsheet which is right now empty. So this new spreadsheet with first default sheet has been added. So we are going to go back to process viewer, open my next task. I'll drill down into this, click open. If title of the sheet, so I'm going to just call it say demo, and I'm going to say it will have 20 rows and 10 columns. Click submit. So if I go back to my spreadsheet, you can see a new sheet has been added with 20 rows and 10 columns over here. And also at the same time, it executed the copy sheet. They were back-to-back operations. So as I can see, there is a new sheet which has been added and it copied over the student data over here from the other sheet. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the home page because the rest of the operations are performed on my sample data sheet. I'm going to start adding some rows. So I'm going to give a student name over here. I'm going to call it, say, Adam Gilchrist, male, sophomore, lives in California, doing major in math and extracurricular activities. I'm going to select basketball. I'm going to quickly copy this again and change it. And I'm going to call this student Elise Perry, female, class level is freshman, doing major in English, and extracurricular activities is baseball. So I'm going to insert two students. So if you see right now, my last row is Will. Before I submit this form, now I'm going to go ahead and click submit. Now, if I go back to the spreadsheet, you'll see that the two new rows have got inserted at the end. Now I'm going to update some cell data. So with the two new rows which I added, I'm going to change some data. I'm going to change their major to say arts and extracurricular activity to drama club. Similarly, for this one, I'm going to change it to math and extracurricular activity to debate. Click submit. Now it has updated the cell data. So if I go back to the sheet over here, you can see the last two columns got updated. I'm going to go back to process viewer. Now it has already read rows out of that spreadsheet, so I'm going to show it on the form. And as you can see, all the students were retrieved from that spreadsheet, and the last two are the ones which I entered. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. Next, I'm going to insert few new rows in the middle. So I'm going to open this and say insert row between row number 20 and 21. Click submit. I go back to my spreadsheet. A new blank row has been inserted between row 20 and 21. Next, I'm going to insert some columns. I'm going to open the form and say starting column letter is E and insert it between E and F. So if I go back to the spreadsheet, you can see a new column got inserted over here. Now the delete cell data operation has been executed. So if we go back to the spreadsheet over here, you can see that the last two rows which I inserted have been cleared. We'll go back to process viewer. Next, it was going to go ahead and delete the column which I added. So if I go back to the sheet, you can see that the column got removed over here. Next, it deletes the rows which have been added between 20 and 21. So as you can see, that row got deleted, the new row which I had inserted previously. We are going to go back to process viewer. And finally, it deletes the sheet within that spreadsheet. So as we saw in the demo, a business process designed in AgilePoint can now interact with Google Sheets to manage your spreadsheets, insert and update rows, cell data, etc. through an app created in AgilePoint. Thanks a lot for your time.